The charity gala was supposed to be about children's education in underserved communities, a cause that Ronaldo had supported for years through his foundation's work in Africa and South America. And when the invitation arrived from the International Education Alliance, promising to raise funds for schools in conflict zones, he had accepted without hesitation, assuming that his presence would help generate donations for teachers and students who desperately needed resources to continue learning despite the violence and instability that surrounded their daily lives. But nothing in the elegant invitation or preliminary materials had indicated that the evening would become a political endorsement session disguised as humanitarian charity. A carefully orchestrated deception that would force him to choose between polite compliance and public confrontation with organizers who had deliberately misled him about their true agenda. The venue was London's most prestigious hotel ballroom, filled with diplomats, business leaders, and celebrities who had been told they were supporting universal access to education. But as the evening progressed and speakers took the stage, it became increasingly clear that this was not a generic children's charity event, but a specifically pro-Israel advocacy gathering designed to generate support for settlement expansion projects that were being presented as educational initiatives, despite their obvious political and territorial implications, that had nothing to do with providing education to children who needed it, and everything to do with advancing a controversial political agenda under the cover of humanitarian concern. Ronaldo sat at his assigned table near the front of the room, his discomfort growing as speaker after speaker praised the pioneering educational work being done in Israeli settlements in the West Bank, describing new schools and community centers that were being built in territories that international law considered occupied. And when the event's true purpose became undeniable, he found himself trapped between his desire to avoid political controversy and his unwillingness to lend his name and presence to activities that contradicted his stated commitment to justice and equality for all children, regardless of their nationality or the circumstances of their birth. The moment of decision came when the evening's keynote speaker, Israel's education minister, took the stage and began explicitly describing the settlement schools as part of a broader strategy to establish permanent Israeli presence in contested territories. His presentation, including maps that showed planned expansions and demographic projections that made clear these educational facilities were not primarily about teaching children, but about advancing territorial claims through the establishment of civilian infrastructure that would make future peace negotiations more difficult by creating facts on the ground that would be hard to reverse. "Tonight, with your support," the minister declared, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who assumed his audience shared his political objectives, "we will fund not just schools, but the future of Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria, educational institutions that will serve generations of Israeli children who will grow up knowing that this land is their rightful home, that their presence here is not temporary, but permanent, and that the international community supports their right to live and learn in the territories that God and history have given to the Jewish people." And the applause that followed made it clear that most attendees understood and supported the political implications of their charitable contributions. Ronaldo felt his stomach turn as he realized he had been deceived into attending what was essentially a fundraiser for settlement expansion, disguised as children's education, his presence being used to legitimize activities that he found morally objectionable and politically problematic. And when cameras began focusing on him during the applause, capturing his image for promotional materials that would suggest his endorsement of settlement policies, he understood that remaining silent would be interpreted as complicity in activities that contradicted everything he had said publicly about equality and justice for all people, regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. The decision to leave came suddenly, but was not impulsive, representing the culmination of months of education about Middle Eastern politics that had helped him understand the complexity of issues that were often presented in simplified terms, designed to generate support from people who hadn't taken the time to research the full implications of policies they were being asked to endorse. And when he stood up during the minister's speech and began walking toward the exit, every head in the room turned to watch as one of the world's most recognizable figures rejected what was being presented as a humanitarian cause, but was actually something much more controversial and politically charged. The silence that followed his departure was deafening, broken only by the minister's attempt to continue his presentation as if nothing had happened. But the cameras that had been focused on capturing celebrity endorsements now documented something far more newsworthy. The dramatic walkout of a global icon who had clearly decided that his principles mattered more than the diplomatic niceties that kept most public figures from taking controversial stands on issues that divided international opinion. And within minutes of his exit, social media began buzzing with speculation about his motivations and the implications of his very public rejection of what organizers had presented as uncontroversial children's charity. The statement that Ronaldo's team released the following morning was carefully worded but unambiguous in its criticism of the event's deceptive marketing and political agenda, explaining that he had been led to believe he was supporting education for all children in conflict zones, but had discovered that the actual purpose was to fund settlement expansion activities that violated international law and perpetuated conflicts that prevented peace and reconciliation between communities that needed to find ways to coexist, rather than continuing cycles of displacement and territorial competition that harmed children on all sides of political dispute. Mr. Ronaldo supports education for all children regardless of their nationality, religion, or political circumstances, the statement read. But he cannot lend his name or presence to activities that advance the interests of one community at the expense of another, particularly when those activities involve the construction of settlements in occupied territories that the international community has recognized as violations of international law and obstacles to peace that harm prospects for justice and reconciliation between peoples who deserve to live in security and dignity without fear of displacement or discrimination. The backlash was immediate and intense, with pro-Israel organizations condemning his walkout as anti-Semitic and politically naive, while Palestinian rights groups praised his courage in standing up for international law and human rights, even when doing so came with significant personal and professional costs. And the controversy dominated international news cycles for weeks, as commentators debated whether celebrities should take stands on complex political issues or limit their public advocacy to uncontroversial charitable causes that didn't risk alienating supporters or business partners who might disagree with their political positions. The legal consequences of his walkout included threats of lawsuits from event organizers who claimed he had breached his agreement to attend and participate in the fundraising activities, while several of his business partners expressed concerns about the commercial implications of his political stand, warning that taking controversial positions on Middle Eastern issues could affect his marketability in regions where consumers might boycott products endorsed by someone whose politics they found objectionable. But Ronaldo had anticipated these risks and decided that his integrity was worth more than any business relationship that required him to compromise his principles or remain silent about issues that affected millions of people's lives and rights. The educational foundation that emerged from the controversy became one of Ronaldo's most important charitable initiatives, a program specifically designed to support schools and educational programs for all children in conflict zones, regardless of their nationality or political circumstances, with particular emphasis on projects that brought together students from different communities to learn about each other's cultures and histories, rather than reinforcing divisions that perpetuated conflicts across generations. And the Foundation's first major project involved building schools that served both Israeli and Palestinian children in areas where cooperation was possible and beneficial for students who needed to learn that their futures were interconnected rather than mutually exclusive. The long-term impact of Ronaldo's walkout extended far beyond the immediate controversy, inspiring other public figures to research the political implications of charitable events before lending their names and presence to causes that might appear humanitarian but actually served political agendas. and creating pressure for greater transparency in charitable fundraising that helped donors understand exactly what their contributions were supporting, rather than allowing organizers to obscure political activities behind humanitarian rhetoric that deceived well-intentioned supporters into funding activities they might not have supported if they had understood their true nature and implications. The Palestinian families who benefited from the educational programs funded by Ronaldo's foundation sent him letters of gratitude that he treasured more than any trophy or award. Testimonials from parents whose children were able to attend school despite living in conflict zones, and from teachers who were able to continue their work despite facing daily challenges that made education seem impossible, but were overcome through resources and support that allowed learning to continue, even when political circumstances seemed designed to prevent hope and progress from taking root in communities that deserved better than perpetual conflict and displacement. Years later, when peace activists and human rights organizations honored Ronaldo for his courage in taking an unpopular but principled stand on issues that most celebrities avoided, he would reflect that the walkout had cost him money and business relationships, but had gained him something more valuable: the knowledge that he had used his influence to defend principles that mattered more than commercial success, that he had refused to be used as cover for activities that violated international law and perpetuated injustice, and that sometimes the most important victories required walking away from opportunities that looked attractive but came with moral costs that no amount of money or recognition could justify. Proving that true leadership sometimes meant standing alone when everyone else was sitting down, speaking truth when silence would have been easier, and choosing principle over profit even when the personal costs were significant and the benefits were intangible but morally essential.